Hey, folks. Thanks so much for joining today. We really appreciate having you here for this really important conversation. In typical Murphy's Law kind of way, they just started jackhammering behind me, so hopefully it's not too loud. And if it is, please let me know. My name is Samer Arabi. I'm a member of the Arab Resource and Organizing Center Action, an organization that was created in 2024 to start to build the political power of the Arab and Southwest Asian and North African communities, particularly from all of the sort of indignities that we have been facing over the last few years, in particular with the genocide in Gaza and the ways in which our communities continue to be surveilled, policed, deported, and otherwise repressed and exploited by the state. The latest example of which just happened today, which I'm sure folks saw with the temporary protected status being revoked for Syrian nationals in the United States, along with hundreds of thousands of Haitians. Thousands of Syrians will now be imminently deported. And a big part of this is the need for the Arab American and broader Swana community to build political power and to assert ourselves on the local and national level as a bloc that's capable of demanding our own rights and to not be dehumanized by the existing political establishment. And in that vein, we are, of course, deeply involved in this election, which has massive ramifications not only for San Francisco, but for the country, in many ways, the world. I'm sure lots of folks are following these elections very closely, and they have already been fascinating. We're seeing the entire complex web of political engagement in this country happening writ small in this moment. And I think this is a really critical opportunity for all of us to discuss what's been happening, the role of various actors, the sort of right-wing push against progressive forces, which appear to be ascendant in many ways. And we've brought together a really remarkable group of people to discuss what's happening, to talk about the strategy for the road ahead, and what the current landscape looks like and how we can fight to ensure that our progressive values are being advanced on the local and the national stage. I want to introduce our incredible group of speakers. We have a remarkable set of folks coming in from around the country who will offer some really remarkable analysis. We have Puneet Maharaj, the executive director of the National Nurses United. We have Celi Tamayo-Lee, the executive director of SF Rising Action Fund. Linda Sarsour, a national leader and grassroots strategist. We have Dean Preston, a former member of the SF Board of Supervisors and a dear friend to us all. And Lara Kiswani, the executive director of AROC Action. And before I pass it over to our wonderful moderator, Joe Rivano Barros, I wanted to really quickly go over a couple of logistics for us. Firstly, this meeting is being recorded, so please bear that in mind in terms of your participation. If you do have any questions, please put them in the Q&A. We will have space for questions and answers at the end of the session. And feel free to use the chat to react and respond to each other. I think it would be great to have an ongoing discussion as the event moves forward. But for now, I will pass it to San Francisco's very own intrepid local reporter, Joe Rivano Barros. Thank you so much for being here, Joe. Really looking forward to you moderating this conversation, and thank you.
Thank you for having me, and thank you all for coming out on a Thursday evening to hear about the election, and thanks to all the panelists. So we'll start talking about the local. Well, actually, I'll start talking about Mission Local for 2 seconds. Mission Local is a nonprofit newsroom here in San Francisco. I am an editor there, and we have been covering the city hall, but the elections extremely closely for several years, and especially doing not only in-depth Q&As with candidates on policy issues, but tracking a lot of the money and the different groups involved in elections here in San Francisco and the Bay Area. So I am going to start with San Francisco context. Here was a primary election in San Francisco, and so we didn't vote on too many things. We did have 2 open supervisor seats. We had several ballot measures. And perhaps most importantly, we had a congressional primary that saw Scott Wiener, Connie Chan, and Shoykat Chakrabarty face off for the top 2 slots. And those 2 have now proceeded to November. So Scott versus Connie Chan. We also saw a boatload of money spent in the elections here locally, not only for that congressional primary, but to defeat, in particular, one of the ballot measures, the overpaid CEO tax, which ultimately was defeated about 53 to 47%, so closely, but it went down. Celi, can you talk more about what you saw locally and how the elections went from the progressive point of view and in general.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Good to be here with everyone. For those who don't know, SF Rising Action Fund, we are a 16-year-old grassroots political organization fighting for the interests of working class communities of color over corporate greed. And we are also proud members of the Working Families Party. The Working Families Party, they had a huge night on the night of the primary election. Some helpful context, I think, is that this election in San Francisco brought out 50% turnout, which is low compared to other global elections, but was higher for a primary in San Francisco. It's usually about 46%. And as you said, Joe, this was the first open congressional election in 40 years, and many San Franciscans were engaged in this high stakes race and conversation about who would represent San Francisco in DC, especially in the face of trying to stop Trump's war machine, the attacks from ICE, and rise up against the tech and AI elite who are working to reshape our economy every day for insatiable profit. I will share that as a Rising Action Fund, we did campaign primarily for Connie Chan in partnership with Unite Here, Local 2, the Restaurant Hotel Worker Union, shout out Local 2. And simultaneously, I do want to commend Shoikat Chakrabarti for consistently bringing the conversation about peace for Gaza and an end to the genocide at the forefront of this congressional race. I feel like he did really help give the SF movement for Gaza and Palestine a voice and place in this race. And that said, Connie Chan had also been very vocal from the beginning against the war crimes of Israel, the need for a ceasefire, and has always had a hard line to refuse money from AIPAC during her campaign. And I want to, I'm sure many people here were aware that in the final weekend before Election Day, there was a Shell PAC political action committee operating with AIPAC funding that dropped about $500,000 of its own dollars to supposedly launch ads against Shoikat, creating really a confusing and divisive climate amongst progressives who were already on the fence about who to vote for. And I think knowing that Palestine is a key issue for progressives and working people, this PAC attempted to really further pit two leftist candidates against each other and draw attention away from defeating the main candidate who has been carrying water for Israel and its moneyed interests. And so now with Connie Chan facing Scott Wiener in the general election runoff, we know that Connie Chan will continue to advocate for Palestinians and the end to all aid in Israel. And I think beyond this important issue, she has had the strongest record fighting for working class communities in San Francisco. She helped fully fund SNAP and Social Security and Medicaid when Trump made national cuts. She also has fought for tenants, such as co-sponsoring the Tenant Opportunity to Cure Act, which is, works to protect tenants against eviction, mandating that they're given ample notice and opportunity to cure an eviction. She also co-sponsored the first in the nation Union at Home ordinance, which allows tenants who live in multi-unit buildings to form tenant associations and collectively bargain with landlords on repairs and rent increases and building conditions, which we know will be really important in this next 6 months to a year when it's expected that several AI companies housed in San Francisco and the Bay Area are going to go public. Many people are anticipating the increase of rent or the skyrocketing of rent, which is hard to believe when it's already so expensive. Connie Chan was the only candidate fully backed by the labor unions because of her years of fighting for working and immigrant rights in San Francisco. So, that said, both Chan and Chakrabarti's races turned out hundreds of grassroots supporters, knocking doors, phone banking, and canvassing to defeat big money. And Shoikat is now throwing his official support behind Connie Chan, which I think is an opportunity for progressives to really build unity against Scott Wiener to defeat him in November, which we know will be a challenge just given the vast support of corporations, the real estate industry, big tech, and the local Democratic Party behind him. And I'll just briefly go over, I think two other main races that progressives were watching really closely in San Francisco, which was the District 4 supervisor race and Prop D, the overpaid CEO tax. If folks are not familiar with this measure, it would have taxed corporations whose CEOs make 100 times more than their median employee. And it would only affect businesses with over 1,000 employees and $1 billion in revenue. And I think a lot of progressives are looking at New York City right now, where the mayor Zoran Mamdani is fully in support and moving progressive taxation to better the lives of everyday New Yorkers. And Prop D was designed very similarly to help close the city's budget deficit, which has threatened to cut hundreds of city worker positions, cut vital services for tens of thousands of low-income, working-class immigrants, youth, elders, LGBTQ residents. And I think for me, it was very felt, this beautiful movement and community outpour for Prop D. People coming from all corners who don't even usually engage in elections, being very excited to see this progressive taxation measure. And yet in the end, groups like Grow SF and resources and support from both the mayor and the Chamber of Commerce successfully squashed Prop D with, tens of millions of dollars and really the promotion of a myth that businesses, corporations, grocery stores are going to leave San Francisco in this time of quote unquote recovery. So all that is to say is that along with the District 4 loss for progressives, given that the mayor had supported Alan Wong, the incumbent, I think that these hard losses, paint a picture of what we will be up against in November. And it's just even more important that I think progressives are continuing to organize and push through the misinformation of the conservative corporate and real estate interests in this city.
Thanks so much. So let's dig a little deeper onto that. Dean, as Celi mentioned, Prop D lost. That was a close loss, and the unions certainly put in a lot of money for it, but were outmatched by a lot of the big business and billionaires who put in money on the other side. But you had these races like in District 4 where the progressives had their clocks cleaned. Like Natalie G went down in a landslide. And there's been a lot of hand wringing from progressives now, and certainly this is not a new thing. I mean, going back to Willie Brown, certainly going back to 2024, like there's periodic episodes of what are we? But in particular now, there's a lot of questions, including among many dyed-in-the-wool leftists. What is the progressive vision for San Francisco? What do you make of that conversation, and what do you think the progressive vision for San Francisco is?
Thanks for the question, and thanks for having me on. And this is a really important conversation. And my job's a lot easier to speak on these issues after Celi because they just really summarized everything I think really well around the most recent election that we just had here. I think I would start by saying that every election, except maybe one or two since I moved to San Francisco 33 years ago, pundits, media, and others have immediately after the election declared that this was the death of progressive San Francisco. It is just part of the sort of tradition. And it is absolutely true that as the city has suffered from massive gentrification and displacement of so many low-income residents from the city and this huge influx of massive amounts of not just real estate speculative money, but also tech oligarch money and AI fueled wealth and like, there's no denying that entire neighborhoods of the city have been transformed. But I also think that it's important after these elections to recognize that the change isn't always as dramatic as it's being portrayed as. Like you look at Prop D as a great example where they put all in against that, right? The mayor, tens of millions of dollars, complete disinformation and misinformation campaigns, trashing the measure, and they got 53%. Did they win? Absolutely. But we're talking about a very low turnout election. I mean, standard for a primary, but only half the registered voters go to the polls. And this incredible amount of money, and they barely win, right? And sometimes I think we have to remind ourselves that the reason these races are so expensive for the oligarchs who are obsessed with cities like San Francisco is because they're trying to convince people that up is down, right? They're trying to convince people trickle down economics works. They're trying to convince people there's no genocide in Gaza, despite what people see with their own two eyes, right? Like and that's expensive. Convincing people to not believe what they actually see, to not have a progressive vision for the city, and especially to convince the working class of San Francisco to vote against their own interests costs a lot of money. So I do, I have some hope in the fact that we're headed into November with this important congressional race and other ballot measures, at a time when we're going to have high turnout here. But I think we also need to not take that for granted. And part of winning a progressive vision for San Francisco is to make sure that we have stuff on the ballot that is exciting enough for people that they get out there in high numbers and vote, especially for younger voters. I mean, I think if you really look at the demographic information of who voted and who didn't, what didn't happen despite efforts by Connie Chan's campaign, Shoykat's campaign of trying to mobilize young voters, that didn't really happen here. It didn't happen here the way it happened recently in New York. In terms of the broader vision that we're fighting for, I always push back on the critiques of the left that there isn't a vision. I think there is a vision. I just think we are in what is increasingly the epicenter of tech money, neoliberalism, and conservative efforts to defund and obliterate the things that we do here that work. So I don't think it's a mystery what the vision is. The vision is a much more inclusive city where it's actually affordable for everyone to live here, where we have a scaled up social housing program, so we're not dependent on real estate speculators and corporate landlords to have a monopoly over people's housing, where we actually use the wealth of this city with our 16 or now $17 billion budget to support people who are struggling in our city, and where we actually value human rights and not just when it's convenient. And that includes progressive visions of what public safety looks like, of what police oversight looks like. I think those continue to be what the progressive vision for San Francisco. It continues to be a popular vision. The question is who turns out, and to what extent can the corporate interests that have unlimited funds, right, to influence the narrative in San Francisco, to what extent can they convince people that up is down, that trickle-down economics works, that simply rezoning some land will get them affordable housing next year, or any number of other issues. And increasingly, I do think it's alarming. The Prop D loss, I think, really hurt for a lot of folks, in part because San Franciscans generally have really shown up for progressive taxation. That's when you look, even when there have been mixed results on candidates, which are always more complicated because sometimes it's just the charisma or the personality or there's a million reasons someone votes for or against a particular candidate. Usually with ballot measures, messages like tax the rich are usually enough to withstand huge money in San Francisco, although it's always close. And this time in a lower turnout election, it wasn't in Prop D. So I think, that's definitely concerning. I don't think it necessarily predicts anything for November because of the anticipation of a much higher turnout election in November. But we've got work to do, and the one thing that has shifted dramatically is just the amount of money being poured in. It's really unprecedented. And what we need to make sure happens is that there's a negative reaction to that kind of unlimited money coming in. When people see Grow SF, which is the biggest local AstroTurf organization, or Neighbors for Better San Francisco, or any of these organizations that are effectively espousing right-wing ideology in San Francisco, it needs to be an automatic no. That needs to be a toxic association. And that's only beginning to happen. Fortunately, there are groups like the Phoenix Project that are exposing the right-wing money and connections. There's writers like Gil Duran who write more about the San Francisco tech money and ideology behind it. But I will say that we've only scratched the surface in terms of really making sure that every voter understands that the stamp of approval from some of these groups, whether it's on Scott Wiener or it's on no on Prop D, whatever that is, that should be a big warning sign to any San Francisco voter. And most folks don't yet know that. And they see these nice names like Neighbors for Better San Francisco. Who could be opposed to that, right? We're all neighbors. We all want a better San Francisco. But the reality is it's, Republican billionaires funding conservative campaigns. So that's what we're up against, and we need to not underestimate it. But it's I don't think we suffer from lack of vision. I think we suffer from lack of effective responses to the right-wing narratives that have unlimited funding these days.
Thanks so much. Lara, let's speak a little bit more about the money and the particular strain of the money. We certainly, the vast sums spent here in San Francisco were mostly, as mentioned, on Proposition D, the overpaid CEO tax, and then Shoykot spent a lot of his own money to try to get into the top two. But we also, as mentioned earlier, saw a last-minute spend by AIPAC. And it's a little confusing, but basically, I'm sure you'll speak about this. AIPAC spent some money, or gave some money rather, to a network of other PACs. And one of the PACs in that network then spent money buying ads for Connie Chan. Just a few days ago, AIPAC actually spent another $750,000 on that same network. Now, that network also funds legislators, Democratic Party legislators across the country. But there was a lot of confusion, and there were a lot of headlines, including from Mission Local, that made these ties. So first of all, what did you make of that spending? What was untrue and untrue about the allegations of AIPAC spending locally here in San Francisco? And then can you talk about AIPAC's strategy on spending in local races, not directly, but now using kind of a network of other, sometimes establishment Democratic Party vehicles?
Yeah, and thanks for laying that out. Obviously, I saw a few questions also in the chat about this. And as Celi also laid out, AIPAC did not fund Connie Chan. They gave money, again, to a PAC that supports progressive candidates, broadly speaking. And then that PAC funded an affiliated PAC that ran ads for Connie. So 3 or 4 layers removed, right? So Connie's campaign was really unambiguous about this. They have not received a dime from AIPAC or DMFI directly, and and the PACs themselves act independently by law. They have to act independently of any campaign. And I want to say this, I'm not speaking on behalf of Connie's campaign, but we know this because this has been communicated directly, right? Connie pledged from day one she wouldn't take any AIPAC money, and she hasn't. And will not, right? So I want to say that pretty confidently here. And for one, second, again, to name that the reason for this was a last minute attempt to really split and confuse the progressive coalition, right? To split the votes right before they cast their ballots. And what's most important, I think now that the dust has settled, is that we should expect both the covert and overt AIPAC money, the direct, the undisguised, the no 6 degrees of separation kind of money to land exactly where it belongs in this race. And that's behind Scott Wiener. He's the candidate in this race who has been most consistently supportive of Israel, who even cozied up to war criminals during this genocide, who wouldn't even say it's a genocide when asked at a debate, right? He's also led censorship of Palestine and of Palestinian children in K through 12 classroom. He's legislated that across the state of California. So if AIPAC wants an ally in this race, That's who it is. And we need to be ready for that money to show up in the general. We need to be louder than ever to attest it, not because only because of Palestine. And if we follow the funds across this country, wherever AIPAC plays a role, they're not only attacking candidates who speak out in the support of Palestinian human rights. They're attacking candidates who support Medicare for all. They're attacking candidates who support housing measures. This is a progressive issue, and AIPAC is not progressive. And so we have to understand them as part of the right wing attempt to undermine democracy in this country. And I also want to speak for a second to clarify AROC Action's position on this endorsement. Going into June 2nd, we understood that we had two progressive candidates in the field, Shoikat Chakrabarti and Connie Chan. Both of them held positions that lined up with our members and our values. They called Gaza, what was happening in Gaza, a genocide. They backed an arms embargo on Israel. They refused to take AIPAC money. On all the issues that matter to our community the most, they stood in the same place. They both understood local governance as deeply intertwined with global justice. Chakrabarti brought a very clear vision that probably the strongest, right, that connected local struggles to the national and global systems, highlighting federal policy and how it shapes our communities. And Connie also brought the strongest track record of delivering on local issues, from housing, public services to workers' rights, and showed that she had the ability to navigate that on the municipal, level. So for us, it was really clear. We decided to do a dual endorsement of both. And because that really reflected where our members were at and where our values were at. And since then, as Celi mentioned, Shoikat has really followed through with his commitments to support Connie Chan and support progressives and is now supporting her through an IE. I think, the last thing I'll say in terms of the pro-Israeli lobby and Palestine is that it's really important to understand that this is a bigger argument. It's not that Palestine is just on a checklist of issues. Palestine is part and parcel of what progressive politics mean, not only in the city of San Francisco right now, but across the country, right? And San Francisco's always defined itself, where it stands on the federal level against apartheid South Africa, the Iraq War. It's a progressive city. And that doesn't just mean standing where it matters on housing policy or labor policy. It means also asking, what are the economic and political priorities of our local and federal government? When our tax dollars go to are used to fund weapons that bomb children, hospitals, and schools, while working people in this country are struggling for healthcare, housing, and education, we don't only have a duty to speak out against this genocide, our actual future in this country depends on it, right? And I think the examples that we've shown in the city of San Francisco over the years prove that, whether it was the ceasefire resolution that our champion, Dean Preston, really led on, and the Board of Supervisors, or the AIPAC free pledges, or the divestment fight. San Francisco's always been at the forefront. And unfortunately, we may not be at this point where New York is, but it means that we need to do what we can to ensure that we're there by the fall. And we have to really show up where it matters, because the person who really represents the values of San Francisco, progressive values right now, is Connie Chan. And we have to prove that we're going to back her and win in the fall.
Thanks so much. So let's talk a little bit about unions and part of that progressive coalition. Puneet, unions were actually some of the biggest spenders locally in this election. They were 4 out of the top 10, and most of that money went towards backing the eventual loss of the overpaid CEO tax, and then Connie Chan as well. Can you talk about labor's priorities this election cycle, and then looking forward to November, what else you expect from labor unions and where they'll be spending? And in particular, I'm curious about how labor took the loss of Prop D, whether that changes any calculus or kind of changes its appetite to shell out for these kinds of measures in the future.
Sure. Thank you so much, Joe, and all the panelists. Nurses appreciate this discussion because they understand the deep connection between war and genocide committed against working class people abroad and the rising fascism and war on working class people here at home. And it couldn't be more clear that it is all connected. When you consider tech giant Palantir is selling technology to hospitals to slash staffing and boost profits, and at the same time, that technology is being used by ICE to kidnap immigrants and by Israeli and US governments to identify bombing targets in Gaza, Lebanon, and Iran. It could not be more clear that the corporate big tech billionaires are enabling fascism. And the California races are a key component to check their power, which is why we were so involved and involved in making sure that progressives win. The techno fascists know that their power is at risk, which is why we saw a record $400 million spent on the California primaries to push their agenda of deregulation, bolstering US Israel relations, and unfettered wealth. A recent report commissioned by Mi Gente, Just Futures Law, and Surveillance Resistance Lab chronicles how the Trump administration is accelerating technology and AI to use to expand immigration enforcement and military force. And at the same time, a small group of tech oligarchs have amassed unprecedented economic and political influence. What we know is that we can organize to resist, and it matters that we back progressive leaders in that fight, and labor unions and the labor movement have a strong role to play in that. So, in the primaries, union nurses endorsed candidates who were unapologetically standing against the influence of the corporate enablers of fascism at home and abroad. So while these election results, some of what we've discussed have varied, we did see progressive candidates win big despite the money spent against them. So a lot of these issues are embodied, for example, in Ro Khanna's race in California 17. Nurses are working in partnership with the Purge Palantir campaign, demanding that our employers and Palantir contracts, and that our elected leaders refuse or return Palantir donations. And we are launching this campaign throughout the country, in fact. And in March, we were proud to successfully convince Representative Khanna to rescind his Palantir contributions. And he advanced in first place and will easily obviously win the November election. We've talked a lot here about Connie Chan in California 11, and she was a critical champion for many reasons for the nurses, but one being the fact that she is a champion for Medicare for All and the Block the Bombs Act and stands up to the Trump administration. And while big tech and AIPAC surely see an ally in Scott Wiener, who finished first, as it has been mentioned, the progressive vote was largely split between Chan and Chakrabarty, who has now obviously since then backed Chan. The nurses' fight for single payer was also prominent in California 14, where Dr. Aisha Wahab advanced to the November election and is favored to win. As a California state senator, Dr. Wahab brought her experience in public health and social work to fight for single payer. She's campaigning on the need for campaign finance reform and is an outspoken AIPAC critic. Healthcare also played a huge role in California 22. Randy Villegas overcame establishment AIPAC candidate Jasmeet Bains, ensuring Central Valley voters have a progressive alternative to Republican incumbent David Valadao, who voted for Trump's Medicaid cuts despite nearly 65% of district residents relying on Medicaid. Villegas has also centered his foreign policy platform on ending the genocide in Gaza and focusing on investment at home. And this really goes back to, what Lara just brought up, right? Is that everything is related to everything, and the progressive candidates that we support, it really matters that the issues that they back are centered around advancing the interests of the working class, ending the wars at home, the wars abroad, and throughout. So these races show that we can beat out the billionaires when we consolidate our organizing power, and especially that is true for labor unions. So as we look ahead, nurses know that along with backing progressives, we must lead the way toward a future that works for us all. So going forward, NNU has launched our Vision for a Healthy Society, which outlines rights that we all deserve, including guaranteed health care, affordable housing, freedom from corporate domination, and an end to imperialist wars. Nurses are advancing our issues also with a tour called the Red Alert Tour, which is to save our hospitals bus tour, which made 4 California stops ahead of the primary. Now the tour is going across the country, highlighting how $1 trillion was stolen from Medicare and Medicaid to fund billionaire tax breaks, warfare, and ICE terror, putting community hospitals at risk. And at each stop, we're inviting attendees to sign on to our Vision for a Healthy Society. And, what's also important is that we build and organize and build our collective power. So we're also building that power by organizing thousands of nurses in the past year, including historic victories like Sutter CPMC Davies, San Francisco's last remaining non-union hospital for nurses. Additionally, nurses have continued to mobilize nationwide in No Kings and Mayday Strong marches, and a week of actions to honor our nurse brother, Alex Preddy, and all who have been murdered by ICE. The stronger that we become, the more they are going to try to continue to stop us. And as we just saw, this month, we've been seeing federal prosecutors charging peaceful protesters, including trade unionists, for alleged conspiracy during the Trump administration's Minnesota immigration crackdown. And this prosecution is, as we know, politically motivated. And the reality is that nurses will not be intimidated. Labor unions will not be intimidated. So when we stand together with our allies, like everyone here is today, we can elect progressive leaders, abolish ICE, free Palestine, win Medicare for all, and achieve a healthy future. And despite some of the losses that we have faced, we know that if we continue to organize around the issues, that we are able to beat AIPAC candidates and candidates backed by conservative forces when we center around our values and center around progressive issues.
Thanks so much. Linda, thank you for joining us. It has been now 32 months since October 7th, and the genocide is still very much a wedge issue in US politics. In New York, you saw just the other night the loss of Dan Goldman, a big supporter of Israel, and the victory of, and I'm going to get her name right, Darya-Liza Avila Chevalier, who, during has been at the forefront of a lot of counter-Israel protests. Can you tell us what role Palestine continues to play in US politics and in national elections and then in local elections across the country? Why and how has it become so central? And what role do you think it will play here in San Francisco's congressional election in November?
First of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored to be here with all these incredible people in one of my favorite organizations, AROC and AROC Action. So just humbled. I wasn't just watching it, Joey. I was in it. It was the most exciting election cycle that I've ever been a part of. Watching incredible candidates come out, bold, brave, courageous, and principled, and proving what we've already been telling people. When you run with conviction, when you run with authenticity, when you lean in and are actually saying that we should be spending money on healthcare and not bombs, regular, ordinary people who are voters, our neighbors, actually support that. The powerful people have made us decide and have tried to make these conclusions for us, but we have been proving over and over again, not just in New York, but in New Jersey's 12th district, where Adam Hamawi, as you all know, is a doctor that served in Gaza during genocide. We watched it in Texas's 30th district, which is Jasmine Crockett's old seat, with the election of Dr. Frederick Keynes III. We watched it in Pennsylvania's 3rd district with Chris Rabb. People said Chris Rabb is radical. This is not going to happen. And it happened. And it happened with Ana Lilia Mejia in New Jersey's 11th district, where Ana Lilia was the only person in a 12-way race when asked, does she believe what is happening in Gaza is a genocide, raised her hand by herself. No one else raised their hand. And people said her political career that has not started is already over. And guess what happened? She is now the congresswoman from New Jersey's 11th district. In New York, it wasn't just Daria Lisa and Claire Valdez and, of course, Brad Lander, who defeated Dan Goldman. It was also sending the first Palestinian-American woman to the New York State legislature. Abir Kawas is a daughter of Palestinian immigrants. Her father was deported from this country about 13 years ago, and she was able to translate that pain and trauma that this country caused her family and made her mother raise her and her three siblings as a single mother in the United States. And now she's going to the New York State legislature so she could take that pain and build power for our communities. She was also one of the supporters, one of the organizers around the Not on Our Dime bill, which is a bill that was championed by Zohran Mamdani in the state legislature that would basically punish nonprofit organizations in the state of New York who basically supported Israeli or settlement organizations that help basically Israeli settlements. And now Abir is not just an organizer, right? She's going to be the champion of the bill because she's going to the state legislature. And what I want to say is that the media oftentimes, with all the work that our communities and that our movements have done, the media decides who to give credit to and who not to give credit to. I give credit to pro-Palestinian movements for the rise of people like Daria Lisa, of the Claire Valdez. Claire Valdez, in her victory speech, literally said, "I'm going to Congress to fight for Palestinian liberation." That's what she said. You know what I mean? Daria Lisa was one of the encampment organizers at Columbia University, and now she will be the congresswoman that represents Columbia University. I mean, poetic justice, it's just incredible. And we're also now, this is not, as they say, Zohran. People kept saying Zohran was a, as they say, a one-hit wonder. We are proving that Zohran is not a one-hit wonder and that Zohran is just part of a larger movement of power building that we have been doing on the electoral side. And it's not going to end with the New York that you saw just on Tuesday night, which was an incredible win. And it wasn't just, again, Abir and these three congressional members. Our entire slate across the city. We defeated establishment Democrats in state seats, state Senate seats, states assembly seats. I mean, it was incredible. I was in awe of it all. We're also going to Colorado on next Tuesday. Milat Kiros, an Ethiopian woman who was an attorney in New York City and who was fired by her firm for writing an op-ed against genocide. Then they told her, you gotta, denounce what you said. And she said, I'm not doing that, and got fired. And she went back to Colorado to do her PhD, and now she's running for Congress, and she potentially will take out a 30-year incumbent next Tuesday. It doesn't end there. You got Cori Bush taking on Wesley Bell and trying to get back to Congress where she belongs, right? You have Dr. Abdullah Sayed, who's running as hopefully the first Muslim American to go to the United States Senate on a platform of abolish ICE as a United States Senator, on Medicare for all, and on stopping military aid to Israel. And guess what? My guy is polling high in those polls, right? And so, again, I am not surprised by all of this. A lot of people are like, oh my God, New York, we're so shocked. If you're an organizer like the people at AROC, you know, and you watch the evolution of organizing on the ground, you know that these moments are coming because you've been building towards these moments for decades, some people before we were organizing. And what we're reaffirming over and over again is that Palestine is actually good for politics. That normal everyday voters, and I'm talking about when you look at New York, people say, oh, New York is progressive, that's not a good example. New Jersey's 12th district is not exactly, DSA territory, like we are, Texas's 30th district, right? Those were not DSA voters, right? We are watching an incredibly diverse electorate that's basically saying, I'm sick and tired of watching my money go bomb children across the world when we could be building hospitals and schools in our district. So I believe in the American people. I believe in the voters. I believe in the people that take the polls that tell us 80% of Democrats supported a ceasefire, that 80% of Democrats support conditioning aid to Israel. Guess what? These candidates are listening, they're resonating, and guess what? People are doing the work. And when you watch New York City, the door knockers, the people that are outside, that the same people who are knocking doors, by the way, in New York City, or even any place. When I went to Philadelphia for Chris Robb, you name it, I saw it. Same people knocking doors are the same people that when there's a protest for Palestine on Saturday, they're also there. So they protest and they knock doors. A lot of time people said, oh, the pro-Palestinian move, they don't understand power. They just want to go outside and yell in the streets. Yeah, we want to do that too, because we want to maintain our issue and raise awareness, and we need outlets for our outrage at what is happening and continues to happen in Palestine. But guess what? We also knock doors. We also do phone banking. We also support candidates that align with our values. And so this is a new day. AIPAC's day, people keep saying AIPAC's days are numbered, but I think, we're proving it. They spent all their money trying to take out, which they did, Thomas Massey in Kentucky. They have spent more money than they have ever spent before. And guess what? That is a win for our movement. When we make people have to spend money to defend genocide in the ways that they had, and we don't have to spend that kind of money. We don't have to compete with their money. We don't want to compete with AIPAC money. We have people power and we have organizing power. We also have the truth. We don't have to do a lot of explaining at the doors. We're like, please don't bomb human beings. We want that money for schools. That's what, and people are like, yeah, absolutely. I have never went to a door where someone said, no, actually, I would love for my taxpayer dollars to bomb little Palestinian children. That is not a thing that people believe. And so the media, powerful people have made us believe that our neighbors want to see our family members get slaughtered in Palestine. And that is not, in fact, the case. But only if you're an organizer and you knock doors and you build community and you build relationships, you know that. For example, New York 10th district, where Brad Lander became the congressman. It has a very high concentration of Jewish voters. The Jewish voters voted for Brad Lander. They didn't just vote for him and it wasn't a close race. They knocked it out of the park. And so they are also reaffirming that you cannot continue to couple the Jewish people with the state of Israel. That our Jewish neighbors want to see justice. Our Jewish neighbors do not like to see Palestinian children being blown to smithereens. And they are also demonstrating that at the polls. And so it's not us telling people that. We are watching the electorate reaffirming what we already know. We know our Jewish neighbors don't like what they see. They know that the Netanyahu government is a fascist regime. They know all the things that we know. But there are people who are hell-bent on dividing our communities and pinning us up against each other. And what we're doing is we're using the privilege of this country, or the right to vote, to demonstrate that we're actually a lot more united than we are divided. And this is the work that's going to continue. And lastly, what I'll say is that 2020, for me, 2026 is really, what do they say? The pre-show or pre-game of 2028. If you are running for president in this country, or thinking about it, or it's a thought in your mind, and you are watching these races across the country, and you are not saying to yourself, my goodness gracious, I better get myself together and get myself together quick. I better understand that voters in this country actually want to know my positions on this issue. Because the electorate knows, if you are good about Palestine and you believe in the self-determination of the Palestinian people, if you believe that an authoritarian regime should not be getting taxpayer dollars to bomb children, guess what? You might, in fact, win a race if you are able to take on that position. So it's an opportunity to remind ourselves the lessons we learned from the 2024 election. Don't make the same mistakes again, because the voters are using everything, whether it's social media, whether the way they vote, whether the polls, you name it. They're telling you every day, like, I don't know what else we got to do to tell people that this issue is going to continue to be a central issue in electoral politics in the US, both on the local and on the national level. So anyway, I'm just very proud, and we just got to stay consistent, stay organized, continue this work. We can't get too confident. We can't get too cocky in this moment. It feels great to win. You know, I just came out of a New York Knicks championship that I was waiting for my whole life. I feel like I continue to feel like a reigning champion. And then Tuesday, I had the same feeling I had the day the Knicks won, and I want to keep having that feeling. So let's continue to stay unified, organized, and let's continue to elect pro-Palestinian, but really pro-humanity candidates all across this country.
Thanks so much. And now we're going to do some final thoughts from everyone. So for folks, we have about 2 minutes each. But what are you looking forward to in November? What races are you paying attention to? And what are some predictions you have for the general? Linda, we're going to start with you again, a couple minutes each.
I'm really looking forward, the one that I'm looking forward to the most, a lot of the candidates that I love and support, thankfully, are not going to have challenges in November. A lot of them have taken out corporate Democrats, and they are not going to really have major challenges as we get into the November election. But one I'm really watching, and I hope the whole country watches, because I always remind people that just because you don't live in a state, it doesn't mean you're not invested in their leadership. And I'll tell you why. So, for example, the one I'm looking forward to is Dr. Abdullah Sayed in Michigan. Not because he'll be the first Muslim American in the United States Senate. Obviously, representation is great. but it's because he's going to be a champion for the Palestinian people. He will be an anti-war candidate, a candidate that will fight for immigrants and Medicare for all and all the things. You never have to worry about Dr. Abdul Sayed, being steered wrong in the wrong way on the things that we care about. But it's a race. When I think about a United States Senate seat, it doesn't matter to me if you're in California, Michigan, Texas, or New York. It's about how many votes we get for the things that we believe in and want to pass in the United States Senate. So we can count on a Dr. Abdul to support things that we care about, like ending aid to Israel, our military aid to Israel, and Medicare for all. So he's one I'm looking forward to because I believe, my prediction is that Dr. Abdullah Sayed will make it out of that primary. He will be the Democratic nominee for the Michigan United States Senate. And I have this feeling in my heart that tells me that the Democrats, as we all know, I mean that as a party, are not blue no matter who. And I don't know if they're going to throw down for Dr. Abdul in the way that he's going to deserve as a Democratic nominee from Michigan. So that's going to mean that we all have to step up as a movement to try to fill the gaps that maybe the party won't fill because Dr. Abdul is not their type of candidate, as they say. Now, I hope I'm wrong. I want everybody to help him. I don't care who you are, even if I don't agree with you, because I do want to see him in the United States Senate. A race between him and Mike Rogers is going to be a very exciting race for this country and will tell us a lot about how much power we have as a movement. We are able to elect United States senators like Abdul. It'll help set us up, hopefully, for 2028, for Chuck Schumer, for Kirsten Gillibrand. There's a couple of people that are opportunities that we have as a movement where we can actually, defeat some of these corporate Democrats, some of these AIPAC-backed Democrats, and put in fresh leadership that is going to align with our community. So I'm excited. I'm fired up. A lot of people keep saying, oh, the world's so dark. Everything's bad. Yes, the world is bad. But guess what? There's also a lot of opportunities. There's a lot of winning that's happening. I don't want anyone to forget. I promise you that we are winning on some fronts. I know it doesn't feel like it, but we are winning. And our communities are strong and we are powerful. And we just got to believe in ourselves that we're going to be able to transform this country. It won't happen overnight, but it's happening. So Dr. Abdullah Sayed for United States Senate in Michigan.
Thanks so much. Celi, what about you? What are your thoughts for November?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, come out for Connie. Come make that connection for people between, for everyday people, between their struggle to afford and enjoy their lives and the gap in transformative, integral, trustworthy grassroots leadership that will unabashedly fight for us. And I think for me, I have to put, the movement lens on, which is that this, of course, is about more than just one race and one election. This fall, San Franciscans are going to have to make choices about a ton of different offices. It is going to be one of those ballots that has like 40 different ballot measures. We have the congressional, we have school boards, city college, board of supervisors, and a ton of ballot measures that will shape who has power and how accessible democracy remains. For example, the mayor is currently gathering signatures for a ballot measure to make it harder to gather signatures for future ballot measures. We have the California Business Roundtable, who wants to make it nearly impossible to create or change taxation by the ballot box with the Taxpayer Deception Act. So yeah, I just want to urge all of us who are on this call to really expand who we understand as part of our own progressive coalition. We cannot only talk to people who already agree with us. We are not going to win that way. We really have to do the work to reach working class voters, young people, immigrant communities, communities of color, people who have every reason to feel disengaged from politics, and do it in language, culturally relevant ways, and with trusted messengers. And I want to say that you might be that unique trusted messenger. It means that, neighbors are talking to neighbors, faith communities, labor, tenant organizations, cultural organizations. And I really want to shout out, the growth of 501c4 organizations that we're seeing, who are doing year-round organizing and mobilizing grassroots members. We also need to keep our eye on building our bench, and we have to pay attention at every level about who we think can run in various races. I would say that our opposition from conservatives in San Francisco to MAGA take this much more seriously than the left sometimes, or at least we've seen that over the last 10 years. And we, of course, have to be pushing our agenda at each of those levels for tenant protections, affordable housing, and accountability. And yeah, we need to just treat turnout as our collective work. It is no competitive race does turnout on its own. We really all have to take responsibility for this, and campaigning has to become an active hobby. I love the way that Linda talked about, people plan their weekends, they go out to a protest, they go out and knock doors. It has to be really that rigorous. And people turn out when someone they trust asks them to vote, helps them make a plan, and reminds them that their voice matters. So, yeah, our task is bigger than election day, and it is up to us to build a durable, multiracial, and working class power, door to door, block by block, and ballot by ballot.
Thanks so much. Lara, what about you? November thoughts?
Well, I'm inspired by folks to kind of also leave on a positive and hopeful note, in that even for AROC Action, a small C4 that started not too long ago, we're very clearly anti-war, anti-genocide, pro-working class demands, organization. 10 out of our 15 races that we endorsed won in the primaries. And that's a real structural win for our movement in the city. We didn't just make our voices heard. 10 races with candidates who reflected working class, anti-war values are moving forward, and we need to ensure that they win. And, the one we're talking about a lot today is California 11. And that's because international policy doesn't usually get decided at the ballot box for most voters, for most of us, right? People don't usually get to decide to cast a vote, to make a statement about our money and where it's going, to make a statement about the genocide in Gaza. And that's exactly what's happening right now. A majority of voters in the primary chose a candidate. Regardless if Scott came out ahead, the majority of voters chose a candidate for calling genocide what it is, Gaza a genocide, and even more supporting candidates who are willing to block the bombs that make the genocide possible. And that is absolutely not a fringe position in our city or any other city. And it is a majoritarian issue that we need to all take up in the coming days. And that matters more here in San Francisco than anywhere else right now because of what's at stake with Nancy Pelosi's seat being open after so many decades. Congress is where weapons authorizations happen. It's where military aid packages get voted on. It's where actual machinery of U.S. foreign policy lives. We need everyone who is serious about winning the progressive vote this fall to sign Track AIPAC pledge, right? We want everyone to be serious about not taking funds from AIPAC. We need everybody to raise their voices about the genocide and in tandem, raise their voices in support of all working class issues. If we win in San Francisco, it's not symbolic. We often say San Francisco sets a precedent. It is time to set a very clear precedent this fall. And it's proof that if we can do so, if we can get a candidate in office that names genocide, that refuses AIPAC money, and we still win, it shows that our values and our practice can, in fact, build power in alignment with what's happening with the wave across this country that Linda spoke of. So I'm excited for that, and I'm excited to see our movement coalesce this fall to ensure that we're all united to defeat all those who are supported by billionaires, supported by warmongers, supported by tech, and to put in office those who actually reflect the values of working class people.
Great. Puneet, over to you.
Well, I'm excited by this hopeful ending to this call, I would say. No, I mean, I think there's a lot to look forward to in November. We can show that we can beat AIPAC, we can beat the techno-fascists, we can beat the tech oligarchs. And really, this November is part of building our movement to taking back our democracy, which is being dismantled day by day. And one of the races that I'm really excited about is California 22. I mean, Randy Villegas was considered an underdog. And to be frank, much of labor backed the establishment AIPAC candidate, Jasmeet Bains, and not Randy, but the nurses backed Randy because nurses stood by their values, and Randy stands with our values. And in fact, Jasmeet, who is of Sikh faith, thought that she had the Sikh vote in the bag in that district. And so it turned out that she did not because, Sikhs spoke loud and clear and said, well, you can't say that you're against the Sikh genocide of 1984, but you are not against the genocide in Gaza, right? So, I think that speaks really loud and clear. And for somebody who was an underdog and didn't have a chance to win, the primary did. So So I'm really excited about that. And, I think when you stand for working class issues, when you stand against the imperialist wars, when you stand for something that people actually want to fight for and live for, it's demonstrating that that's winning. And the establishment Dems need to stop underestimating voters, that voters actually do vote smartly and do understand and do want a better future that is not backed by corporate billionaires.
Thanks. And Dean, final thoughts.
Well, I really appreciate everyone lifting up the different races where there have been significant victories, and there are a lot of them, and I think especially a lot of the local ones. Linda talked about a bunch of them, but they're really significant. They are the bench for future, even at the ultra local level. We just learned recently that one of our former fellows from my office went back to his hometown of Tempe, Arizona, is now the first Bobby Nichols, first DSA person elected to Tempe City Council. I mean, it's like you look in community stuff that does not end up on national news, and you see these candidates who are fighting for working class people, fighting for economic justice, fighting for racial justice, fighting for human rights, winning. And I do. I think it's really impressive to look at. Lara talked about the success, 10 out of 15, I think you said, of the AROC Action endorsed candidates, obviously coming off New York City, where DSA had a near complete sweep. And races that, I think here in San Francisco, obviously we're watching the congressional race, but there's other stuff happening around the country, some of which has been elevated. The mayor's race down in LA, obviously, is another very significant one that we'll be watching. But I think one of the things that the New York experience shows yet again is this rebuke of the status quo of the Democratic Party. And I think that we are hoping to do the same thing here in San Francisco. For those who aren't here, the local San Francisco Democratic Party has literally been taken over by tech billionaire money. I mean, they are literally the sponsors of the party. They funded the slate that took over the Democratic Party. Our San Francisco Democratic Party is far to the right of the California Democratic Party or most other local Democratic parties in California. And they lined up behind Scott Wiener in the primary. So I think when I look at New York and see the complete victory of activists, of people who are values and principle based, of democratic socialists and close allies who are actually fighting for something, not just careerist transactional folks, right? It's hard to look at that and not see that as a repudiation of the status quo Dems there, who did not line up behind those candidates that ended up winning. And it'll be interesting in San Francisco, where almost every endorsement from the San Francisco Democratic Party is going to be for things that most people on this call and this Zoom oppose, right? And so, yes, hopefully we win these folks in the Democratic Party back. But in some ways, I think what was shown in New York, and hopefully we can show in other places, is with or without them, that the movement is not dependent on a political party, and it's going to fight to win these races. Now, looking specifically at San Francisco for a minute, obviously this congressional race is hugely important, and this is a once in a generation or multi-generational opportunity to have someone replacing Pelosi who will be an advocate for working class people. Or have someone who has shown through an extensive career to be really a tool of corporate interests and those who want to suppress human rights in this country and beyond. So I think it's obviously the job of our candidate of Connie Chan to through her campaign to motivate people. I've worked with Connie for years. I worked with Connie on the ceasefire resolution that we passed here and that she supported, and on countless tenant rights and labor issues in the city. And Connie and I didn't always agree on everything, but I have no question that of who she represents and why she's in politics, and the fact that she will fight for workers, for tenants, for people who are struggling in San Francisco, in real contrast to to Wiener. But whatever they, there's certain things they need to do through the campaign. But there's also things, no matter what they do, there are also people who are going to resonate more with issues. And to the point that I think is correct, I think Lara said that you don't get to put on the ballot funding for Israel, right? You don't get to put that on the ballot nationally. But in San Francisco, we do get to put issues, local issues on the ballot. And I'm really hoping that in addition to outpouring of support for Connie, that we see the various ballot measures, positive ones that progressives in San Francisco are pushing for. So we're pushing an affordable housing measure that would dedicate hundreds of millions of dollars of taxes on billionaires to affordable housing and ramping up social housing in San Francisco. Advocates are, some of whom are on the call, are pushing a public bank measure that's going to be on the ballot in San Francisco to establish a public bank in the city. And so having issues like that on the ballot to help to not just pass good laws, but also to help with turnout, and having all these different campaigns working together to the greatest extent possible is really key to overcoming all the right wing and tech fascist money that is flooding San Francisco.
Thanks so much. And so while that is the end of the official panel, we're going to do some audience questions. So inviting folks to stay on for another 10 or 15 minutes. And for panelists, because we're running out of time, try to keep your answers on these to 60 seconds or so. Let's keep it brief. But Dean, you've teed me up. I'm going to actually go over to Celi for this question, but this is from an audience member. How can San Francisco DSA replicate New York DSA's results in the November election? And in particular, there's a question here about whether San Francisco progressives should be focusing more on turnout and voter registration, given kind of what a few panels have said earlier, where yes, it wasn't a historically low turnout, but 50% is not great just anywhere. So what do you think of that, Celi?
Yeah, I mean, maybe Dean can speak more to DSA. SF Rising Action Fund is part of the Working Families Party, but I think if anything, it's really positive to be seeing these alternative, not even alternative, but like much desired political entities being built from the grassroots level, and taking local elections very seriously. I think that has been a positive maturation from a lot of anti-electoral attitudes on the left to actually be involved in vying for power, knowing that those people shape the different policies that impact us. And yeah, I think this piece about voter registration is essential. There are, I think, over 100,000 people in San Francisco who are eligible to be registered and are not. And so that's definitely the work of all of our organizations, and especially organizations who are 501c3s, to be doing voter registration, especially in a time where we're just seeing voting rights being attacked. Yeah, I don't know, Dean, if you want to speak about DSA specifically.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think on the voter registration is obviously ongoing work, right? It's always in some ways the voter in the crunch of an election is not always the best time to be focused on broader registration. But it does, these ballot measures do and candidates obviously engage a lot of folks and get them involved. But I think groups like AROC and others who are focused on, and the C3s working on registration, can do that work with the people they work with, not just in election cycles. I think DSA has in San Francisco, and this is just my reflections. I don't speak for the organization, although I've been a pretty active member for years. But a lot of the electoral work in San Francisco of DSA has been focused on ballot measures. I mean, in the last few years, have been basically 5 for 5 with major ballot measures, despite massive spending on the corporate side. And then I was, when I won in 2019 and 2020, I was in 2 races, was the first Democratic Socialists elected in 40 years with full support of the chapter. And then Jackie Fielder in 2024 won with DSA endorsement. But DSA has not so far taken a like broader slate approach, and I think it's something that'll be discussed, but so far at least, there have been like individual races and trying to develop individual candidates and then backing bold ballot measures. But I think, certainly everyone looks at New York right now and other places, right, where DSA chapters have been running more candidates and are in ongoing conversation about whether there should be, more of a slate or some parts DSA, some parts, with the other allied organizations like Working Families and others who have candidates they want to run as well.
Mhm. And here I have a question actually on Connie Chan, and actually, Dean, I'm going to have you take this one. What does Connie need to do to separate herself from the legacy of Nancy Pelosi? And I wonder if you can talk about, there's a lot of assumptions made of what comes with an endorsement from Pelosi. I mean, you yourself were endorsed by Pelosi in your 2024 race. So, what do you make of this question of how tied will Connie be to who Pelosi was as a congresswoman?
Yeah, I think there's sometimes a little bit of a bubble on the left of those of us who are frustrated with some of Pelosi's positions. I mean, she enjoys upward over 70% support in San Francisco. By some measures, more like probably 75% or so. So, just from with a sort of more political lens on, there was a lot of people, asking about like with her endorsement, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. And I'm just looking at it as someone who's a candidate. It's, in terms of winning against the corporate candidate with all the money and all the backing, I think it was actually quite good for her campaign especially for a lot of people who are lower information voters and who have heard of Pelosi for years, and is kind of a household name, and to have that endorsement was, I think, helpful for her campaign. But I don't think that, I mean, look, Nancy Pelosi out of nowhere endorsed me in a race, an endorsement we didn't expect or ask for. She's not a democratic socialist, and there certainly was like quite a bit of difference between my views and hers. I don't think it's really Connie Chan's job to like run around explain to people everything where she agrees or disagrees. She should put forward, as she's been doing, her vision, which is clearly in sync with Pelosi on some stuff and very much not in sync with Pelosi on other things, and that's okay, right? And so I don't think she needs to do a big comparison distinguishing. I think she's been doing a pretty good job of articulating where she stands, and let others make those comparisons.
Yeah, and I would add, I think the endorsement of Pelosi, of Connie Chan, just represents, this struggle that we're seeing within the Democratic Party. I think that it also just speaks to kind of the uniqueness of Connie Chan herself. I don't think she is a typical candidate that Nancy Pelosi would endorse. And in many ways, it says a lot about who Weiner is, that Pelosi would sort of depart from kind of the establishment legacy type candidates. But yeah, Connie herself doesn't come from that same cloth. Like, she did not grow up wealthy. She herself is an immigrant. She grew up very working class, and obviously identity is not everything that shapes one politics. But I think that, what Dean said was very true from our own conversations on the doors with a lot of working class voters. Having Pelosi's endorsement was that added thing that helped them feel like Connie might be the right leader for them. And I think, just it is all of our ongoing work that once Connie Chan is hopefully in office, after we do the work of electing her, it will be on us to hold her accountable to the platform and the values that we elected her for.
And Linda, you wanted to jump in here?
Just so nobody yells at me that's from California and says I'm a New Yorker and I should mind my business. But I think I do have a little opinion because I was watching, of course, that race, and I'm invested in these congressional races happening across the country. I just want to say something that's more like generic and in general, because I have debates all the time with people across the country in different districts about different candidates. And people will say, oh, this person did this before, but what about this and what about that? And, I say to people all the time, and I get people drag me on the internet all the time for this, but I don't care because it's really what I believe. Um, People who run for office are not perfect, and we oftentimes are looking for the perfect candidate. And in some cases, we do find people that are almost fully aligned with us. And I'm not saying that that's not possible. It is possible, but sometimes there are races where that's not the case, where someone is not 100% aligned with you. When I go to the polls and I organize people and I knock on doors and people tell me, well, this is what they don't like about candidates. I tell people this is not just about you. Our votes are solidarity votes, right? When I go to the polls, I'm a very privileged person in comparison to many in my community and other sister communities. And sometimes I have the shittiest people that are running for office in my area. Um, and I come from South Brooklyn. My district is connected to Staten Island, and you don't even want me to tell you about what I got to deal with where I live. But I always say to myself, who is the person in this district that is going to do the least harm to my people? And who's the person that is at the very least going to maintain some of the things that we have fought for? And that might not seem enough. It might not seem motivating to people. But I promise you that there are people who cannot vote that are counting on us. People who are incarcerated, people who are in detention centers, people who are undocumented. There are children in our community who are under the age of 18 that cannot vote as well. And so I would say this, and I don't mean this particularly about Connie in particular. I think that's a no brainer. I hope no one's still debating about whether or not we should be helping Connie become the next congresswoman from the district, because the same argument stands. I think oftentimes there are people that are in our movements that are quite loud, who are extremely self righteous. And they treat politics as a self-righteous sport, and it's not that. It's not the same as building power outside in the communities. I'm self-righteous outside, but when I'm in the political space, I have to make decisions that are rational, that are strategic, and that are also not the last decision that I make. If we believe, for example, that a candidate like Connie could go into office, and let's just say we may not agree on with Connie on 100% of things, but guess what? Once Connie becomes the congresswoman, your job is to hold her accountable. Your job is to maintain a relationship with her. Your job is to continue the organizing outside to ensure that not only is she held accountable, but that she gets to say, look at these people outside. They're my constituents. I answer to them. I answer to these people that are my neighbors in this community. The reason why I support healthcare, the reason why I'm going to support the Palestinian people is because my constituents support the Palestinian people. It's because my constituents want to see people have healthcare. So I'm just saying to folks that politics is not the end, right? It's just the beginning. So go to the polls, make the best decision. And these people are also not about who you like. I don't care about who I like. These people are not like people you go to dinner with. Like, some people might know them personal enough to go to dinner with, but most often regular people don't. It's not a popularity contest. It's really going and saying, what is the best decision for the people that I love the most, for the people that are the most harmed, the most hurt in this country? What is the best decision for them? And that is the privilege that we have, to go into a polling booth and to make that decision for people that wish that they had the privilege that we have to go into a polling booth. So I hope that you organize. I saw somebody asking a question about this. I think that a lot of times we talk a lot about money in politics, and even on the progressive side, there's more money that's being invested on the progressive side, in the PAC spaces, et cetera. But it's about the field. And I know these organizations, and I hope people are turning out volunteers and turning out door knockers and turning out phone bankers, because that's also how you win. Money is important in politics. We have to donate to candidates. We have to make sure that they have the resources that they need, but we also need to help them in the field.
Thanks. There's another question here about the California 11 race, actually. That we've heard the word excitement used to describe electoral victories elsewhere in the country, but we haven't heard that word used about this race, this primary, and now this general. Why is that, and how can we solve it? The audience member asks. Maybe Lara, do you want to weigh in on this, and then whoever else wants to jump in?
I don't necessarily get excited about any electoral races. I get excited about the outcome and what's made possible for our people. And, I think that knocking on doors in 2024 and when we had just started AROC Action and it's the genocide. And we would knock on doors and folks were tired of people knocking on doors. And the minute we would show them, oh, this is AROC Action, this is a pro ceasefire slate, everyone's eyes widen and they'd be like, oh, tell me more. There is an appetite right now for real change in this country, and that makes me very excited. There is potential for real change in this country, and that makes me very excited. And I think that where we're going to find excitement is talking to everyday people, hearing what they need and want, and then ensuring that we get people in office that reflect that. And I definitely can tell you Scott Wiener is not that. And I can tell you that there's folks who are that, and that there's work for us to, to do now to make people excited about the potential. It's not about the person, it's about the policies and it's about the outcome. And if we can do our job on the ground to organize and mobilize and move people and agitate them in all the right ways to ensure that on the other side of this, we can push for real material change in the lives of everyday folks. That's exciting, right? And we're at a time now where we have a duty and a responsibility to do so. So I don't even care if I'm excited or not every day. I feel dutiful. I feel purposeful. I feel clear about the mandate ahead of us in this moment, in this country, as on the rise of fascism, the rise of genocide. We need to do everything we can to put a stop to it. And it excites me to imagine what's possible. New York inspired me, and I think so many other places across the country are inspiring. And I also will say every day when you knock on doors and you talk to folks, that is exciting. That is inspiring. Folks are ready for something really different. I'm excited by this panel. I mean, we have National Nurses United, the largest nurses union in the country, saying we are anti-genocide, we're for working people, and our members are excited about that, right? We have San Francisco Rising Action, who is leading the groundwork on, in San Francisco to ensure that all progressive issues are really shown out, like we knock on the doors for all progressive issues and we move and mobilize those votes, right? We have a former supervisor, Dean Preston, the champion of our ceasefire resolution in San Francisco, who's telling us that I'm still in this. I'm still fighting, and I have hope for San Francisco to really beat the billionaires. And then we have Linda Sarsour, who's been leading on the front across the country, keeping track and helping to mobilize people in every city on every issue, not just Palestine, who has a finger on the pulse and telling us that real change is possible. So I'm excited by this potential, and I think that we should all really leave this conversation knowing that we are really responsible for doing more every single day. And truly, a different world is possible, as Abby said in her closing speech, in her victory speech in New York.
I just want to say one quick thing to that question. I think people also mistake, right, a commitment and an inspiration with excitement. When people go knock doors, and especially if they're doing it and they believe that this is an extension of the work that they do for Palestine, I do it because I get up every day and I'm like, what am I doing for my people? What am I doing for my people? And it's a motivation. It's like a drive. It's not even the fact that this is like, trust me, knocking doors it could be exciting, but it's actually not the most exciting thing to do. Not a lot of people like to do it. Phone banking is not that exciting, but we got to do it. We have a drive. I think that's what it is. When people see these young people at the doors in New York, it's not that they're so excited. They got a drive. There's something that like is moving in them that tells them go outside and do this because it's something that's bigger than you here. This is something much larger than what you're doing. This is part of what we need to do to free Palestine. This is what we got to do to free our neighbors. Motivation and drive sometimes is mistaken for excitement. And I'm excited that people are still using the inspiration of the Palestinian people to tell them that you have a responsibility, at the very least, to participate in the democracy and to elect leaders that we deserve and also the people of Palestine deserve in this country.
Thank you. And Puneet, final question, and we only have 60 seconds or so. But how can the pro-Palestine movement and organized labor increase their cooperation and connection, especially in electoral campaigns?
I mean, I think it's going back to, making the connection that everything is interrelated, right? And what we were talking about earlier, that the same people and the same institutions that are funding the genocide in Gaza are also funding the closures of hospitals in our communities and killing patients here and killing patients and people in Gaza. It's all interlinked. And, it takes a lot of education and for people to understand that their vote and their decision to actually make that leap and continue to support issues that matter to them matter, right? So, as organized labor, certainly we are committed to continuing to educate our members and the broader labor movement, right? Every time that we are fighting for an issue, the goal is to bring the broader labor movement into the fight as well. So, we have a big task ahead of us, obviously, with November, and I think the theme of this closing call has been to build people power, and really we have the obligation to build people power beyond our organizations. It's beyond our communities and throughout this country everywhere.
Thanks so much. And thanks to all the participants and all the panelists. That is it for today. Thank you so much to AROC Action for hosting this and for bringing us all together and for spending your Thursday evenings learning about politics. Thank you.